Welcome, everybody. And I can see a list of those of you who have joined us, and it's so nice to virtually see so many familiar faces. There's also some new ones to me. And so if you are on this webinar and you haven't had a chance to get to know me by doing a mentoring session or a walkthrough with me, then please make sure you reach out. That is something that I strongly encourage everybody to take an opportunity of to have. So tonight, we're going to talk about human upgrade consults, or the art of genomics consults for biohackers and other self-aware people. And later in this broadcast, Dr. Laura Lyle is going to join me. And I think it's going to be a good webinar for all of you, even if you are not sure whether or not you want to be part of the referral list for the Dave Asprey event. Because the main learning objective for this evening is to be able to prepare for a genomic consult with minimal effort. And that's a skill that all of you will benefit from. Genomics has a certain amount of innate complexity because humans are complex. But with Intellix DNA, we really encourage you to learn how to use the tool and be able to create that simple first consult that helps them be excited to learn some of the most important things that are new to them or important in general for their health. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to spend a little bit of time on how to filter the genomics into an appropriate amount of information to share for an hour consult. And then we're going to talk more about some of the logistics so that you are prepared to handle inquiries from people who are referred to you from the podcast with Dave Asprey or other avenues who want a consult. So people who are not necessarily your patients, they don't necessarily have a deep relationship with you or may not know you at all, but want to have a genomics consult because it's a little different than when you're doing it for your own patients. And then the kind of extra special little thing is talking about how to work with biohackers. And as a little sneak preview of that, I was talking with my colleague physician who's done quite a bit of work with biohackers. And she said, you know, Sharon, the thing about biohackers is they come to you and they have their CGM data and they're like, well, when I have 3 ounces of sweet potato, it only makes my blood sugar go up this amount. But if I have 12 ounces, it makes it go up this number of points. And so sometimes they have so much data. And so helping them figure out how to optimize their health and not go crazy can be interesting. Forgive me. So who is the audience for a 1-hour consult? Can you do it with someone with a chronic illness or just with biohackers? And I think there are challenges to both groups. But if somebody has complex illness, they really from the beginning need to understand that working with you for 1 hour is not going to get them where they're going. But biohackers are generally looking to optimize their health. They often already have a lot of data about their own body. They're often interested in longevity. They're often already on quite a few supplements based on their own reading and listening. And sometimes they're not yet in a position of what I would say trusting physicians. They might not be looking for a physician partner, but as you know, Intellix DNA is only available to licensed healthcare providers. And so you need to sort of establish that rapport with them that helps them realize how you can guide them to better health. So when you're supporting this demographic, we're going to talk about instead of trying to initially sell them on a whole package, we're going to ask that for this particular referral list, you be willing to offer an introductory 1-hour consult. Now, you can also offer a 90-minute consult at a higher price or different packages, but some of them may want to essentially meet you, see what you can do before they agree to more. We're going to help make sure you're prepared for biohacker frequently asked questions. You'll want to know some of your longevity SNPs. And we're going to talk about Clotho a little bit here today. And there's also resources on our website with the webinar I gave with Dr. Bredesen on that. It's the one with the turtle. We're going to encourage you to promote the patient report as a great resource for the biohacker post-consult. There's a lot of information in that report. And a lot of times with my seniors, for example, I say, you don't even really want to look at the patient version because they're working with me for a year, 2 years, 7 years. And I might just give them the deliverable of the hotspot and my summary. But the biohackers want the data on themselves. So make sure you know how to publish that report. And then know that we will also, to support you, give you a specific packet of information. Most of this is going to go out tomorrow, some of it next week, but it's going to be a sample patient information sheet that you can use to send out to them. It's going to be a sample sheet that is a letter that says, here's how the consult works, et cetera. We want to make this as seamless as possible for you. And we're even going to have a separate mini page on our website that has frequently asked questions to make it easy on your office staff. So what I thought we would do tonight is, before we take your questions, is let's go through a case with a biohacker type personality. And that way you'll see how I make the data into a concise format that works for that 1 hour question, 1 hour consult. So the first step to a successful biohacker consult is know what you're going to focus on. So have a questionnaire, and again, we have one that can help you with that kind of focus, so that you have some idea of what their goals are, what runs in their family. And you want to keep it focused. And so you want to go, what are your top 2 goals, for example? Prepare for the consult, but don't spend a lot of time on that. You should be able to prepare for the consult in 15 minutes most. I'm going to show you how to just scan the genomics and map the most important SNPs into a worksheet. When they get there, during the consult, make it a conversation, and you'll see how I did that with this particular true patient. And be ready for their biohacker type questions, longevity, brain, things about the patient version. So we're going to do the case study of Katrina. And Katrina is a 59-year-old woman who had a heart saver CT, which showed some calcium buildup in her arteries with a score of 62. So not huge, but as we know, any score is significant. And she has an elevated Lp(a) because she's done some advanced lipid testing and wants to be proactive. She knows her ApoE status as well. Again, not uncommon amongst biohackers. And she knows she's an ApoE4 and is worried about her memory. She feels like it's not as good anymore, but she does comment, as I spoke with her before the consult, that she feels like it hasn't been as good since she started going through menopause. Other things that I just noticed about her as we are starting upon the consult. She's clearly quite thin, because in this day and age, when I see a thin person, I think semaglutide or one of the other GLP-1s. I said, so are you taking any GLP-1s like semaglutide or Wegovy, et cetera? She said, no, I've always been this way. Her family history, again, you don't need a super detailed one because you only have an hour, but I did have her fill out a form, and it's pretty unremarkable. Father had severe asthma that was allergy triggered, but he died prematurely after a car accident, so she doesn't have much other family history on him. Mom didn't die till 84. She died of a stroke, had some heart failure, and morbid obesity, which I found interesting, again, given that this person was pencil thin. Okay, how do we prepare for the consult? So you want to keep your prep focused, because then your consult will be focused. We want to limit this initial consult to 1 hour. In order to limit it to 1 hour, you're going to focus on foundational SNPs and a couple of topics. So as I'm mapping out, I map out all the foundational information, even if I don't use it all on the first consult. Vitamins and minerals, gut, inflammation, detox, etc. When you're choosing your topics, if you're doing a 1 hour consult, I would only choose 2 topics, because there's going to be things that you're going to want to map out that you might want to bring up. And if you have too many from the patient, you might not have time for something that might be the biggest wow moment, because they might not think of it. And you'll see that this is one of those cases. So I consider the third other topic as what I call news you can use. Generally things like anesthesia risk, melanoma risk, blood clotting risk, things like factor V, or something that's just very, very interesting. And the more you can focus your 2 topics, the more you can focus your consult. Hi, Dr. Lyle, is that you?
That is me. Hi.
Hi. So we just started the case. Feel free to jump in if you have comments as I'm going through the case. I can't see you because of the way my screens are, but then we're going to have time afterwards where I'm definitely going to want you to speak and talk about your experiences and biohacker information. Um,
Absolutely.
tips to the wise.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we were just saying, as you're mapping this out, let's look at Katrina's hotspot. So the first thing I always do is scan. When I'm scanning, I'm looking for anything that's interesting. And I always want to look a little deeper into things that are unusual. So I don't often see CPT2, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 2. It's only in 0.6% of the population. So since I'm not as familiar with it, I'm going to read about it. And it says statin intolerance, CPT2 activity. That doesn't give me enough information to see if it might relate to her. But then I read individuals with this SNP have impaired ability of mitochondria to convert long chain fatty acids into energy due to decreased CPT2 activity, which can contribute to muscle breakdown with heavy exercise and an increased risk of low blood sugars. Statins may worsen symptoms. So I'm going to kind of keep that in the back of my mind because I may want to ask her about her experience with heavy exercise and low blood sugars. So as we're mapping out on this page, I'm going to make a note of the CPT. I'm going to make a note of the NQO1 because that's a detox SNP. I'm going to ignore the osteoporosis SNP, even though she's 59 and this might be important. I'm going to bring it up as a topic that we can talk about, perhaps if she chooses to work further with me. Same thing with the dopamine beta hydroxylase, the addiction and substance abuse. She did a powerhouse, and so that this person has a lot of different information. So you don't have to map out everything. You're scanning the report for the most important things. Again, this CPT2, even though it doesn't fit into either of the categories of her concern of cardiac or brain, I'm going to make sure I map it out so I can bring it up since it's only in 0.6% of the population because it's rare and actionable and she could have effects and not know it. CPT2, this is a good opportunity to learn about it because you may not have seen it yet, is an irreplaceable enzyme for mitochondrial long chain fatty acid oxidation. And of course, our mitochondria either need to use fatty acids or the pyruvate pathway for carbohydrates. But in using the fatty acids for energy, CPT2, so CPT1 helps you get carnitine into the acyl carnitines, but then CPT2 converts it into acyl-CoA and energy. And so without this, she gets stuck and builds up too much acyl carnitines in her muscles. So just kind of an interesting pathway. Well, it turns out I started to look a little bit more to refresh my memory. Knockout mice model, they say that CPT2 knockout mice, when you have low CPT2, they stay very thin because they can't accumulate anabolic lipids, but do accumulate 22-fold more long-chain acyl carnitines. And carnitine supplementation, which is listed as an intervention here, so even if you didn't know that about her being thin, it lowers acyl carnitines and improves insulin sensitivity independent of muscle mitochondrial fatty acid capacity, and in other words, could make her muscles work better. So this is actionable. So that's just a little side note. And that's going to happen every now and then that you're like, well, this is an interesting SNP. What else is worth mapping? So the things in blue I felt were directly related to her concerns. Lp(a) for heart. The insulin receptor relates to heart. The ESR1, which relates to her menopause and her cognition. Remember, she complained that her cognition got worse with menopause. And we'll see that the little pop-up there talks about that due to her combination, that, in males, this combination of ESR SNPs has been associated with cognitive decline. But the same can be true in postmenopausal females. The maybes, the questions are ones that it's up to you. What I usually do is I put these questions, if I'm like, this might be interesting to talk about, I tend to put them under other, as I might want to talk about it, or I might just refer to it and say, maybe if you want to do another consult, would like to talk more about X, Y, and Z. And it kind of gives them a taste of why they would want to schedule further. As we get farther into the hotspot, you've got to be really picky. Don't overmap. So I mapped out her choline pathways because, again, that's a vitamin and nutrient. I mapped out her TCN1, again, a vitamin and nutrient. I make note of the fact that I'm going, 2 more melanoma SNPs. That's worth knowing. We might just want to bring up that topic. I map out her brain. So I'm ignoring lots of things, but she also has a TCN2, so I'm going to map that out because it's B12 again and affects her brain, as well as her ApoE4 and TOM40. So she knew she was an ApoE4, but did she know this much about her ApoE4? I don't know if you were able to read the pop-up on the last slide, but there's really good news in her ApoE4 pop-up. So again, for any of you who are newer, this might not strike you quite as quickly, but many of you on this call are quite experienced, and you know that when you have ApoE4 without the BCHE-K variant, that's fantastic news. That cuts the risk of Alzheimer's in half. So if the risk is typically about 3.4, goes down to 1.7. But she has other good news. She has the protective benefit of the good Klotho VS haplotype. So Klotho, again, for those of you who are not familiar with it or as familiar, is a very unusual SNP in that the risk Klotho and the benefit Klotho interact so that, and are frequently co-inherited, almost all the time, in fact, so that the best thing to have your Klotho be high, which is Klotho is a good protein for longevity, is to have 1 copy of each. And that's what she has. So she has the protective benefit of the Klotho haplotype, which decreases her risk of Alzheimer's further. So we definitely want to map this out and stress it. Just so you know, at the top of the report, you can either show risk and benefit SNPs or show risk SNPs only. If you're showing risk SNPs only, you won't see the Klotho until you unclick or go into the report. But there is the Klotho when I unclick, which is an antioxidant longevity SNP. So as you can see, it gives a significant advantage to living a lot longer life and decreasing the risk of stroke by 83%. Remember, her mom died of stroke, so this is great news. Okay, so I've scanned and mapped the hotspot, and I have a plan. So as you can see, this is not a very busy mapped hotspot, and that's on purpose. I ignored things. If you take home no other message from this, it's if you only have a 1-hour consult, be choosy. So we're going to talk about choline and B12 from nutrients. For cardiac, we'll go to the cardiac panel, but we have 2 that we want to focus on. For her brain, I mapped out a couple of things, but it's mostly good news. And then under other, I have a little bit about blood sugar, a little bit the CPT2 and the melanoma, and I might just talk about that briefly. How do you structure your consult is the next step. And the thing there is you want to get rid of the stuff you're not going to talk about. So while you're in the hotspot report on that top right, you're going to have these choices regarding the hotspot report of send to report builder, view detailed report, or print PDF. Click send to report builder from this right side so that it maps out in the hotspot order. If you use the button on the very top on the left, it's going to send you to the report builder and you have to start from scratch. Of course, there is a button once you're there that you can say start from hotspot. Then I'm going to look at what it starts with and I'm going to rearrange. I decided that I was so curious about the CPT at the top that I decided I wanted to talk to her for about a minute at the beginning. Then I put something easy. You could start with the easy things and leave the CPT to later. It's really, again, a personal choice. Then I put, choline and B12. Then I put the things that related to cardiac and brain. Since the environmental toxins related to CoQ10, it's the MQ01 SNP, I thought that's pretty easy to intervene. So I put it, again, up by nutrients. But again, there's no right or wrong. It's more about having a meaningful first consult. You don't need to get to everything. You want them to have a good experience so that they want to come back and talk to you more and that they feel good about what they just invested in. Okay, so we talked about getting the history and understanding their concerns, prepping for the consult. Now let's talk about having the conversation with the patient. So when I always say before you even open it up, give them a one-liner about why you're excited to get them excited. And so when she walks in, the first thing I'm going to do is say, Katrina, I'm really excited that you ordered Intellix DNA because I think you're going to find some really helpful news and some really good news. I think we're going to have better understanding of how we can protect your heart. I think that you're going to be thrilled to understand that even though you're an ApoE4, you've got a ton of things that lower your risk from your brain, but we do have insight as to how to protect your brain. But I also want to cover a few other topics today that are just things that came up that I think might be interesting. And so I was curious, I want to start with a SNP that you have that's found in less than 1% of the population. And it relates to how our muscles store energy and use energy from our food, from both fats and sugars. And I was wondering if you've ever had any muscle aches or problems with low fasting blood sugars. I also was wondering what kind of exercise you do and if you have any problems with exercise intolerance. And this started a great conversation because she said, oh yeah, I was also kind of wondering about my metabolic issues, and like the language you can is very already very biohacker, because she had worn a CGM and she said it would wake me up early in the morning with low blood sugars where the emergency alarm goes off because it's around 50. But then she would eat something and it would create a spike over 200 when she would eat some carbohydrates. So I said, you know what? I completely can see why that happens. You have a combination of SNPs that cause you not to be able to store energy. So at night, your blood sugar is going low, but then you also have an unusual combination with it where you have what I call the skinny diabetic gene that makes it so when you do eat sugar, you don't have, or carbs, you don't have the ability to release incretin to help to respond to those carbs. And we talked a little bit about her exercise. And she said, she goes, I exercise. But then when I talked to her about her exercise, she only does 10 to 20 minutes of elliptical, then switches to weightlifting. I, again, just briefly said, that's really interesting. Again, I think this is because of the CPT2 gene. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we've got lots of other things to talk about, but it makes it so, again, your muscles can't store that energy in the mitochondria for long aerobic exercise. And so before we go on to what everything else we're going to talk about, I want you to experiment with taking carnitine, and I would take it with each of your meals, but for sure at night, maybe even some before bed. And let's see if it helps with those fasting blood sugars if you do a CGM again, and also your exercise tolerance. Then I move into the fundamentals and which ones are particularly important for her. I switched to the main report here because I want to be able to pop open the clinical significance. I don't have to talk about each B12 SNP. I can choose. I like TCN2. I think it's a very interesting SNP. So I said, so the first nutrient I want to make sure you get enough of is B12 because you have less ability to carry B12, but particularly also less ability to transport it into your brain. One of the reasons to do Genomics University, come to study sessions, come to our live conference where Dr. Lyle will be teaching in both our beginner and our advanced track, is it really helps you kind of get those what I call one-liners. Laura, feel free to jump in.
Absolutely. Well, I think, one of the things, first of all, Dr. Sharon, I can listen to you all day. I have done how many of these consults, but the way you present things and the information, I think no matter how many of these you've done, continue to always listen to you. But these are key, and I'm a big fan of TCN2. I definitely point out the things that I think that the patient won't be aware of. And I think it's really interesting when you can explain to them about the transport across the blood-brain barrier. It's not about peripheral levels only. So it gets really something they're not aware of. Yeah.
Right. And I like to, you don't have to memorize the report. Sometimes I'll quickly glance and I'll say, for example, if we don't give you enough B12, you can get peripheral neuropathy even with normal B12 levels. So normal for you, we're going to aim for around 1500 or more. And so then I had a conversation with her, and conversations with these biohackers. And again, Laura, you can give me your insight, but I find like they want the conversations. So I'll say, with you being in that 20% of population that doesn't transport B12 well into your brain and spinal cord, Have you ever tried B12? It might help your mood, or it might help your memory as well. And she's like, yes, as a matter of fact. And again, she didn't put this on her intake because it's a short intake. It's the one supplement I noticed makes a big difference for me, and I take it regularly. And in fact, in the past, I even did B12 shots, and they worked great. So now I can tie it in and say, see how well genomics reflects what's going on with you. Let's go on and we'll find some things that maybe you haven't known about yourself.
I think also what's key in this point is that with biohackers, you're pointing out, you're teaching them something, and you're teaching them something about their body. And they're going to know their B12. The majority of these patients are going to know. They know about methylation, and you're going to have them at hello at that point right there. So that's a very easy one to actually get their attention for sure.
Yeah, and choline was also a great one for her. Remember, these are the only two. I didn't make them up. This is her genomics. And choline was the other nutrient she needed. Well, this also related to what was going on for her, because her symptoms, everything got worse with menopause. Well, what is the building block for choline? Estrogen. Remember, and again, if you don't remember, there is in Genomics University, but also under the special pathway considerations, whoops, there's a little graph, but estrogen allows PEMT to make choline. Without choline, she's going to have increased risk of muscle damage, but without choline, she also can't make acetylcholine. And so this may be part of why she noticed more memory issues postmenopausal. She also has some ESR1 SNPs that we'll talk about. So again, I said the other nutrient for you is choline. And then you can talk about, well, phosphatidylcholine is great for the muscles, but for the brain, you might want acetylcholine. For somebody who has this muscle SNP, the solute carrier, that one, based on the input from our doctors across the country, we're finding that they do best with phosphatidylcholine as well for the body periphery, as well as having acetylcholine for the brain. So the CDP choline, the uracil that's attached to it, no, uridine, helps it gets transported into the brain. Okay, so now we go back to that worksheet. So I remember what I was going to tell her. I don't fill it out ahead of time because she's only paying for an hour consult. I don't want to spend an hour prepping, and I'm going to have a conversation. And I just go, let's put down B12. So remember to have that in the plan. Let's put down choline. We can talk about acetylcholine, phosphatidylcholine. If you want to talk about dietary choline, you can give her a handout in the document library, etc. And then you can talk about that if you want. Again, you just have to pick what you want to do with your time. Then I brought in NQO1. And so with NQO1, remember, it's an environmental toxin pathway detox. So that's a little different than the glutathione, which affects mercury and even some of the mold. The NQO1 is smoke, pollution, benzene. So before I even tell her that this having 2 copies lowers her activity by 96 to 98%, again, ask her a question and engage her. And I say, do you ever notice any problems when you're around pollution? And she goes, yes, I feel horrible around car exhaust. So again, then say, you're only in the 4% of the pollution 4% of the population that's most sensitive to pollution. So now she's very interested. And then I talk to her about, you can't recycle the antioxidants into their proper antioxidant form. And I will even explain, I'd say, we can't be eating antioxidants all day. So the reason these are micronutrients is we get a little bit of CoQ10 in our diet, and we go from the CoQ10 to the which is the antioxidant kind of backbone, to the UBQH form, which is the active form, and then back again and constantly reuse it. Same thing with vitamin C, same thing with vitamin E. Well, she can't recycle it. So I'm like, you're going to need more of it. Again, we don't need, if she starts to go down an in-depth conversation pathway, I'll say, let me give you the brief version. All of this is going to be in the patient version of the report, and we can talk more about this if you want to do another visit, but I do want to make sure we get to the heart and brain. And so what she said at this point, we were about not even halfway done, is she goes, wow, I've actually learned more in 30 minutes than I've learned in years from biohacking, and we haven't even gotten all the way into the report. So she was excited. Now to her main concern, cardiac. So her cardiac SNPs really aren't that bad. I mean, having I actually wonder if part of her calcium buildup, I'm sure some of it's some of the SNPs, but I wonder, I don't think we know if her carnitine palmitoyl transferase can contribute to it. But we talked about LP(a) and how we can dramatically lower the risk with aspirin. If you don't know that about LP(a), you probably haven't done Genomics University or come to our live conference. Again, I'm putting in a plug for our live conference. It's in July 24th and 25th, but you can click on it and you will see the top intervention is aspirin. And that was proven in the women's health study. They looked at women with LPA SNPs and showed they could lower their risk 50% with aspirin. So we talked a little about that. With the insulin receptor gene, when you pop it open, and again, you don't have to memorize this, you just pop it open, you're going to see it's increased risk of heart disease, but it is much worse, becomes 6 times the risk or 7 times the risk if you're obese. She's really thin. So I said, so that's good. You're thin, you don't have insulin resistance. That's a good thing. And you even have some benefits that help your HDL be higher. Because Katrina's main concern was cardiac, I open the full panel and I say, as you can see, there's lots of different gene variants that contribute to heart disease. And it's your chances are in your family, there are people who had, there may be your mother had 2 of some of these copies, but you've got a lot of a little bit of things. But let's just pick the most important things for you. And the other one that I would address is CDKN2A, because you're already having calcium building up in your blood vessels on CT scan. And then I would talk a little bit about CDKN2A puts calcium in the arteries as opposed to the bones, and that we can address that with vitamin K2. So now the biohacker is seeing that there is an advantage to working with a doctor, because that is, we as physicians, we as clinicians, we can explain the medicine to them. And she's, again, having a good consult. I also did touch upon the fact that the heart is a muscle and that the carnitine deficiency is important for her heart health as well. And that maybe not so much from a heart attack standpoint, but cardiac function, cardiomyopathy. And she does say that already she is not able to exercise the same way she used to. And I believe that you're going to find that in your CPT2 people as they get older, if they don't take carnitine, because those acyl carnitines are going to build up. So again, we talked about carnitine, super important for you. Now I say we only have 20 minutes left in the consult. Onto the brain. Lots of good news. I talked to her about what we saw in the hotspot and say, I know you knew your ApoE4, but that is the biggest disservice that we're having done, is people knowing ApoE4 without understanding all the different genes that interact. And again, this is something where we can go through it, that Intellex pops it out for us. But what this says is, yes, you have ApoE4, but a much, much lower risk than the average ApoE4, because 75% of ApoE4s have TOM40. She does have TOM40. Almost half of ApoE4s have a combination with other SNPs that make it a lot worse, such as this gene called BCHE. BCHE relates to anesthesia metabolism, but it also relates to tangles. You probably have heard of amyloid tangles. You have a benefit there that you don't have this gene that cuts your risk in half. And then I'm going to talk about Clotho. And with Clotho, because it is like a big biohacker, longevity SNP, just the way I would describe Clotho is, this is great news. Clotho is the #1 longevity protein. And the good kind of what I would say fun fact to know about Clotho is not only that Clotho regulates all your other antioxidant pathways, but I'll ask them if they've heard of mTOR or rapamycin. And Laura, do you agree that most of these people have heard of that?
100%, yes. And they are going to ask about Clotho.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on. So
no, it's really, this is probably one of the key SNPs. I'm so glad you're spending time on it, because obviously I think some of the biohackers think if 1 is good, 2 is better. And I'm sure you're going to expound upon that. It's not.
Right. This is, as we said, Clotho is part of what you have to have. The ideal is the VS haplotype. And that's because, and there's a whole webinar I did with Dr. Bredesen, Dale Bredesen, that has a turtle on the front in our just our regular Intellex DNA website under physician videos. But basically, the fun fact that I think that the biohackers like about Clotho is, first of all, I say you have good Clotho. You have the highest Clotho you can have genetically, even though you only have one, because it's a very unusual gene in that if you get 2 of the good, you get 2 of the bad, and it doesn't work out as well as 1 of each. And so the good thing though is again, you make a lot of antioxidants. That helps protect your brain. That does a lot of things for oxidative stress. A fun fact is people who have low Clotho not only age more quickly, but they can do all the things that they would want to do. They could do rapamycin and the fasting and all the stuff. The mTOR pathway can't work without adequate Clotho. It's that important. And then we can say, this is really a good thing for you because right now, because of your carnitine deficiency, you have a hard time with aerobic exercise, but Clotho raises with aerobic exercise, but luckily you have naturally high Clotho. So this is a good thing. Other important longevity SNPs to know are FOXO3. It's a benefit under cardiac, and it is a nutrient sensor essentially. And then know that ApoE2 is a good benefit for longevity. And there was a longevity webinar I gave where I talked about both of these in depth for AMMG, and that is now should be either in Genomics University or under our, I think we're putting it into Genomics University. Otherwise, it would be in our Intellex under providers. But you can actually still go to the AMMG, which is Age Management Medicine Group website, and access that. But ApoE2 improves the immune system. ApoE2 individuals had a much higher likelihood of doing things they loved, being involved in exercise, hobbies, et cetera, in their 80s. And so that's a longevity SNP as well. Those are the 3 biggest. Look at her whole cognition and memory panel and give her, though, what else she can do, because she wants to improve her memory and she says it's not where she needs it. So I pointed out she's got lots of benefit, but I also pointed out there's a couple of areas if you want to further improve that you can. I do think that the B12 and the acetylcholine are going to help. But the other thing we may want to address is that MTHFR, because everyone knows MTHFR, IL-6 combination, and we'll talk about that, and then hormones. And so you don't have to explain it all. She can go, I want to talk more about it, and she can schedule another visit. So I talk about MTHFR, which you've heard of, is involved in depression, it's involved in methylation. But when you have the combination of low MTHFR, which is needed to make serotonin, norepinephrine, ultimately acetylcholine, all these different brain transmitters, along with high inflammation, that can increase vascular dementia. So we want to make sure that you have some methylfolate in whatever vitamin you're taking, and that we're doing something to address IL-6 type inflammation. As you guys know, there's tons of things that address IL-6 inflammation. And I just was at a regenerative farm, and moringa is actually really good in homemade breakfast bars. I saw the moringa growing, and they had like little balls that have moringa and dates and nuts and different things in it. So there's so many different things, sulforaphane, quercetin, et cetera. You can have a conversation as to what makes sense for her. So I decided for her to use sulforaphane and methylfolate. I also addressed her ApoE by talking, again, really saying, good news, you've got that combo, but you do have this mitochondrial issue. And along with your carnitine palmitoyl, we want to take good care of your mitochondria. So let's put you on some ATP 360. She also had the estrogen receptor SNP that popped up in the estrogen pathway. And so we talked about estrogen patch. This was a really interesting conversation because she saw a cardiologist about her heart saver CT with a score of 62. And Laura, you order more of those than me because I don't see that many patients at this point in my life, but 62 is really low, right?
It's considered low. Below 100 is considered moderate, on the low side. Yeah.
So her cardiologist was like, you can never take hormones because of you can never take hormones because of a heart saver CT is 62.
Yeah. And again, this is a common theme we're hearing in our practice. Very common. And it's actually, in my opinion, just the opposite, especially when you look at these genomics and longevity.
Right. And so what I told her is, I think you need a new cardiologist. Yeah. I seriously said that to her. But I said, but arm yourself but I want you to feel comfortable because I am not your cardiologist. Let me show you that transdermal estrogen, low dose estrogen, even, even in studies with oral estrogen, there was cardiac benefit, but especially with transdermal estrogen, that there's no concern ever in the literature from a cardiac standpoint. That's why postmenopausal women have more heart disease than pre.
Absolutely.
So last thing I said, I'm so glad we've had time today. Hopefully we've gotten to your main concerns. Know that I'm going to give you this patient version. Talk about, do they want it downloaded and sent to them via email, or do they want access to the portal, so that you don't have to sit there and download and send an email or show them how to access the portal. Make sure one of your staff knows how to do that. That's a really helpful time saver. And then talk about, if you'd like to do more, why don't you try these things? I would love to see you again. If you would like to do another 60 or 90 minutes, here's my price sheet, etc. I actually have a membership model, but we do have other doctors in our practice that do consults, and we give them initial package and then opportunity to buy more if they want, or to become a member. In our practice, we haven't become a member after they've done consults. But again, for this case, you're going to make sure you give them the patient version. I also give the hotspot, and I give the worksheet, and then a very basic plan. Again, I don't have time to type up everything I just said. So my plan is, here's the nutrients, here's the, the choline, here's the dosage, here is the estrogen that I would recommend you have your primary care, give you a prescription for, etc., and kind of map it out, just literally a summary of a plan, and then say, if you'd like more time, let's schedule it. So the deliverable, don't make it too complicated, but they like seeing that action plan or worksheet. I tell them, you can have my rough draft. That's my worksheet. It kind of maps it out for them in that same way, because again, these biohackers, they are used to thinking in terms of detox and inflammation and nutrients. And so I could give them literally the hotspot, the patient report, and my worksheet, and they'd be happy. But I also gave a very basic plan. So this was kind of the basic plan that I gave.
And I like that you pointed out the low percentage SNP. That was really relevant to her, right? I'm sure, she's going to walk away from this consult really learning a lot about her body in 1 hour, like she said.
She was absolutely thrilled, and now she's having her 3 daughters do it, and all kinds of other people. The other thing is, she had 3 different SNPs that are melanoma risk. So this is a pale, obviously the picture was not the actual patient, but we tried to find someone who is a similar skin tone, a very pale, like light-skinned woman. I shouldn't say pale, but light-skinned woman with 3 different melanoma SNPs showing up at the hotspot. So I did talk to her about, you've also got a lot of SNPs that contribute to melanoma risk and many other things we can talk about. Wear sunscreen. You can also talk, there's also quercetin, niacinamide, but we'll talk about it at the next consult. There's also lots more we can talk about with osteoporosis and lots of other things. And so, again, there's lots to do. One thing before we go to Laura, kind of Laura giving some helpful hints from Heloise, as I would say, that I want you to keep in mind, but this sort of ties in. Anticipate the biohacker going, I want a copy of the clinician report. They're going to be like, I want to know everything. And you just have to be able to say, it's an online tool, but you're going to have, and there's no way to share that. Just so you guys know, it is legally, we only can sell it to licensed healthcare professionals, as you guys know. But I tend to find that we can kind of quiet them down and get them calm of just saying, really, you're going to find a wealth of information in the patient version. Would you like that emailed or that? And we can look together at the clinician version for more at any point. Everybody should know how to get to the patient version. If you have any problems, reach out to Wendy or Christy, whichever one of them you have worked with on our team. And you can either publish it. For the report builder, you know where to get to that. You can generate report, you can view the patient report, and you can save or publish. The reason you go to report builder first is you're going to want to add everything in. They may want the whole, most likely these biohackers are going to want the whole patient version. So you're going to want to add in everything at the bottom before you generate that patient report. If you want to give them any handouts, you can get that from the document library. And if you are, some of you, many of you, most of you on this call have already qualified to be on the list for the Dave Asprey podcast referral. If you don't know who Dave Asprey is, the reason we are doing this special training is we do anticipate a lot of people wanting what we call a biohacker consult. Dave Asprey has written a lot of books. He was best known for his Bulletproof Coffee. I've had dinner with Dave Asprey. He had 6 lamb chops and a lot of other things that we would not consider heart healthy, but for him it works. And so, but it doesn't. And we started this by saying, I was like, Dave, that works for you, but a high saturated fat diet might not work for everyone. And that's the whole point of genomics. And then we talked over dinner, and then he's like, come on my podcast, let's talk. I'm not sure what we're talking about yet. He was also interested in environmental and cardiac and lots of different topics, but I'm meeting with him and filming live on the 12th, and he anticipates it will go live the end of February. So if you want to be on our list, you have the criteria. You have to have done at least half a genomics university or come to a live conference and have completed at least 5 reports. We want you to be successful. He typically gets about 124,000 listeners that first week of the webinar and has 3 million followers. When we had something similar with Mark Hyman, who was more like around 90,000 listeners, 60 to 90,000, we had over 800 people looking for offices for consults each week for the first month. He has a lot of followings in New York, Texas, California, and Colorado, but across the country. So we're anticipating, because of who his audience is, a lot of people looking for you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura to give us any other helpful advice she can give us.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for opening this opportunity up to everyone doing the Intellects genomics. I mean, it's phenomenal opportunity, I feel, for especially people, even if you're just new getting into this. I actually think having a time limitation is an advantage because when you start doing these consults, you know, time goes fast, right? You have a lot of information. I love how you presented, you know, picking out the highlights and really focusing on what matters to that patient. So I really strongly encourage always zeroing in on patient concerns, you know, filling out those worksheets. I think when I first started doing this, I thought, oh, I don't know if I need that worksheet. And, you know, after going to the course in Austin, Texas, and I'm like, wow, they're really using that sheet. So we rethought, you know, how are we using this in our office? And to this day, it is one of our best tools. And so I think you can fill that out. I know you can fill that out very quickly. And I love looking at Hotspot. I kind of scan it to get an idea of what's going on. I don't know if this happens to you, Sharon, but it just pops off the page. They have a lot of cardiac, or they have a lot of inflammatory, or they've got a lot of detox issues. And all of a sudden you've got the theme you can see.
And that's your opening sentence to the patient of saying, you know, I mapped out some of the most important things in your genomics. And what we're really going to spend a lot of time on today is inflammation, because you have a number of different kinds of inflammation, and that can affect so many other things. And again, the more you listen, the more you come and learn, the more in depth you'll be able to be. But there's a lot in the tool. Like, as I was working on women's health, for those of you who don't know, we are releasing a women's health and fertility report momentarily. If you want to have, it won't be formally released, like in terms of being sold to people who are not established Intellects users, until spring. But if you are somebody who's done more than 10 reports for that one, and you start to have patients that are fertility, PCOS, endometriosis, reach out to us. Basically, in 2 weeks, you'll be able to order that. We have that kind of, as long as you're going to join our kind of study group, as I'm going to call it, our alpha tester group. But as I was working on that, we learned a lot about IL-6, for example. It goes up in response to all kinds of tissue damage. It goes up and that after, why I learned in women's health is a different story, but IL-6, if somebody has heart surgery or has a heart attack or a stroke, they can also have depression for up to 10 years later because it's a kind of inflammation that goes up in the brain, but if you don't address it, it stays up for a long time. So you're going to learn lots of fun things. Map it out. Know that is a very soon, meaning this spring, you're going to be able to press a button and have all those foundational things automatically mapped for you and be able to use a feature to be able to do a very fast map. But meanwhile, map it out and be fast about it. Like you don't have to write. If the panel's called benzene and environmental toxins, you can just write ENV detox. It's mostly for you to know where to go so you can structure your consult. But map it out, scan, but when they come in, give them your hypothesis. It's going to help set up the consult for success and tell them why you're excited. Because if you're excited, they'll be excited.
And I love you mentioned that, because I have found some people come into these a little anxious, right? They're not sure what they're going to find. And I really like being able to point out why I'm excited that they did this, and, give them a little bit of a summary at the beginning. We're going to be discussing some really good findings. I think you're going to be excited to hear this. And you've got them listening. I think in this longevity and biohacker, I love it, human upgrade. I think that's what you guys are calling it, or longevity. Everybody should be clicking to look at what the clotho is, because they're going to ask. And if it doesn't pop up on your hotspot, then you might not know what that is. And I really think it's important that you know that one.
Let's make sure everyone knows where to find it. So clotho, the best discussion of clotho is in the brain ischemia report, in the stroke report. And that's because low clotho dramatically increases the risk of premature stroke. Like the risk of having a stroke before age 50 is something like 40 times higher for the 2% of people who have very low clotho, especially, although that study was done in Czechoslovakia, so probably because it's an antioxidant regulator pathway, Czechoslovakia, there's a lot of smoke. Even if you're not a smoker, you're a secondhand smoker. So as you go to the bottom, it's the very bottom of the brain ischemia panel, and it will show up. So that's the where to find it. FOXO3 is at the benefit section of the cardiac, and ApoE2 is obviously in both of those two panels as well.
And I like that you pointed out the BCHE. I think that's going to be important because, if you get somebody with an ApoE4, it's, again, pointing out SNPs that everybody talks about ApoE4. And there's just so many other critically important ones for longevity. And I think these are ones that you're going to teach them something talking about these things. And that's really a biohacker, what, they're looking to learn. And you've got this amazing tool in front of you that has these answers and snips of information, literally, that you can teach them about their body.
And if you have somebody that is a little more skeptical, you can use the trick. You don't have a lot of time to do this, but you can go into the literature. So let's say they have a TOM40, which is a mitochondrial membrane. You can say, look, even though you're not necessarily having memory issues yet, you've got these mitochondrial membrane issues. I'm going to give you something called, and like I say, you can use any of the ones that have the lipid factors. I like ATP 360 because it also has some mitochondrial cofactors. But you can say, look, ATP 360, I'm going to give you that. Look at the study. If you Google, you'll find their study. It showed in a matter of less than a month improvement in energy, and I think it also even showed some cognition, but it definitely showed an improvement in energy in less than a month. B12, lion's mane mushroom. No one or two studies, and again, that Genomics University is going to help you get comfortable if you have someone that is that kind of person. And by popping into just one study, you can say, not going to look at all the studies today because we won't get through the hour, enough stuff in the hour. But I want you to know that everything in Intellix DNA is referenced and evidence-based. So I think it's going to fit with your values as somebody who wants to make sure you're doing what's right for your body.
And pulling up one of those studies, we use that often, especially in our longer consults, because it does break it up a little bit, and you can kind of, get them to see, wow, this isn't, look at, that's actually on PubMed or wherever. So I think it is a great tool. When you have an hour, it may be a little harder, right? But I think
I agree. I don't think if you're gonna do a study, you're probably gonna do no more than one. Like I popped into carnitine just to show her that could affect the heart, but didn't have her read the study or anything.
And I also think in this demographic, and I don't know if we talked about this at all, but I don't release mine ahead of time. And I feel longevity biohacking. I don't do it in any patient, even if they, or they're not a biohacker. But I think it's really, they can really get worked up and they can overanalyze, and you want to deliver some information that's news to them. And if they're, reading it, so we always, in all patients, because I think this as a clinical decision support tool, we're there to help them understand it. We're not there diagnosing, we're just simply helping them understand their genome, and releasing it after is, always best.
I think I agree with that 100%, because also by then, remember, these people, they've often, the reason someone becomes a biohacker is they've had a bad experience with a physician where they came to them with a problem, with autoimmune disease, with fatigue, with whatever, mold, and the person didn't help them and they had to figure it out on themselves. So you establishing yourself that, look, I'm not that person. I'm somebody who's here to help you. We're going to use the DNA together to learn, but where you can be a guide and help them efficiently go through the DNA, they're going to see the reason why they want to work with you. And we know they're going to get better results working with you than doing this on their own. It's a lot of information, as you guys know. Even as physicians, you've had to invest a lot to become fluent in genomics. So to think that somebody who has not invested that time is going to get the same outcomes as you can get by guiding them is just not the same. Let's talk for a minute about what report to order. And so we are encouraging, if they are ordering, if the biohacker wants only an hour consult, then you don't want to order more than a double report. So you can either order plain medical, you can order plain brain. Most of them are going to want the executive, or if their main concern is depression or anxiety or something like that, then again, only order a combination that's a 2 combo. If they're like, I want everything, what we did is in the letter, we said, if you do want all three reports, you will need to make at least a 90-minute, and you will need to invest 90 minutes for an initial. There's just too much information to go over it. But you're going to have the letter. So there's going to be a couple things, logistics, then we can ask Laura as many questions as you want. We already talked about, you got to figure out your price point. Initially, we were going to say 400 to 500. But, we understand that the rent in Northern California and the rent in a small town in the Midwest might not be the same. So we're going to let you guys decide what your market is, but we would encourage you to think about it as an introductory pricing. And we do believe that if you can keep it in that 400, 500 for that 1 hour consult, we're going to have a lot more success with these referrals. Now you can say, once they've met you, that was my special, Dave Asprey, human upgrade intro, additional hours are XYZ, or you can keep it the same rate, or you can say the maximum I allow people to do is 2 visits. After that, you would need to become a member, whatever you want to do. But have the letter, you will be able to edit it and put it on your own stationery. We just wrote a rough draft to make it easy on you. We already talked about the biohacker questions, longevity SNPs. Again, make sure you know how to release the right documents. And most importantly, all of you, and most of you on this call, well over half, I can see the names, are people who've come to our live conference. You guys have this, you're experienced. So we're going to, from the fact that we're going to send out an email, but we're going to opt you in to the human upgrade referral list. If you want to opt out, you will have to send a note saying, take me off of that. So if you're on our other referral lists and you've come to this webinar, we will be opting you in. If you want to opt out, you can either put it in the chat right now. Jordan is watching the chat. Or you can send an email to Mike Sheridan, msheridan@IntelliXDNA, and we'll be happy to do that. But we want to make it easy on you. We think it's
better, by the way. I think that's really going to help administratively and to help keep the cost down.
Yeah. And you're gonna love. So Dr. Mel Sotos, who used to work with me in my practice, she is now doing just virtual genomics consults, but she worked with Mike on a sample just a simple form. That's a form you can fill out that if you have Microsoft Office Suite, you can edit on your own and make it your own. So we have a lot of tools that you can use to make this easier. So have fun with it and use it as an opportunity. If you have a new doctor, make sure they're trained so they can do some of these. And so if you have any questions, you can email Mike. But if you're on this call, so we did this last week, I did it on Friday, and we had somebody who had watched 50% of Genomics University and felt ready to do it, but she'd only ordered 3 reports. She ordered 3 more this week already. So she will by the end of February, and we will kind of seal that list February 12th. So you've got till February 12th to get your 5 reports ordered and through half of Genomics University, because there are some people on this call that maybe have only ordered 2 or 3. Laura, can you talk for a moment for the people that are newer at doing this, that are having a hard time talking about genomics to their patients? Like I feel like if you're seeing patients, getting 2 more reports is going to be easy. But do you have any tips on that?
Sure. You know, we have a very established practice. So, you know, I think when you have trust as a provider, when you have a tool that you bring to your patient, it's pretty easy to talk about it, because I get very excited. I think it translates. And I think as a practitioner, when you see that you literally have the owner's manual and you can delve into some long-term chronic healthcare issues, that gets patients really engaged. The only time I see resistance is in a patient that has fear. And, you know, I'm always talking about the fact that knowledge plus action is power, right? And so when they realize that there's action, well, just knowing a SNP is not enough. Like we used to just know gene SNPs, but through your organization, Sharon, you know, you guys have done a phenomenal job in giving us the tools and the research to be able to empower people to not live in fear. And I find it just a natural transition, even in our new patients that come in our practice. You know, it can be overwhelming coming into a practice and there's lots of blood work and getting to know them. But even on initial consults, we are on many cases ordering them, because we're just finding it so valuable to be able to get our patients on track early on. And when you can tailor supplements and lifestyle and nutrition to a patient's genome, you're giving them a service that very few can do, you know, truly at the level that this tool provides. So I think it sells itself in that aspect. And as a provider, I get really excited, you know, and I think patients realize that. So the key is just really explaining to them, you know, I think patients can, in the end, save a lot of money on wasting money on supplements that maybe they don't need.
Yes, at the last time when we did this on Friday, one of the conversations that Dr. Kaz and I had was people who come in on 20-some supplements. And the way that I handle that is I actually say, let's pretend you're not on anything and map out what your genomics would maybe say might give you some of the best benefit. And then we can go from there, and you can decide if you want to kind of revamp everything and kind of start fresh. This might be a great time. Well, let's see if we have some questions. So I'm going to pop out the questions, and I think that, so let me see. Okay. Is there going to be a biohacker panel? No, there's not going to be a biohacker panel. You're going to order the executive report or the medical overview. Most likely the executive report is what I would recommend, unless you have somebody. Again, that's why having a letter that says, we recommend, if your main concerns are longevity, cardiometabolic, cognition, etc., we recommend the executive report, which also includes detailed detox, inflammation, etc. If your concerns are more regarding mental wellness, such as anxiety, depression, blah, 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 we recommend this. So it's a letter. And then are we giving them the full report at the end of the consult? I do for I give any patient who wants a copy of their full report, the full patient report. I give them the choice of either having login for the portal or emailing it to them. It can be downloaded, but I find that, again, it depends on the personality if they want that, but the biohackers are going to want it. I can pretty much guarantee you. Yeah. There is a question about a couple people wanting to be added to the women's health. And Jordan, if you can make a list of those names, then we can send out follow-up email and let you know when that's available. Someone asked, is there going to be a breast cancer panel for the women's health? you have to be very careful not to do a risk calculator and not to do pathogenic genes when you are a genomic clinical decision support tool. So, because that's a different category than someone who's doing like BRCA pathogenic genes. So there will not be a breast cancer panel, but there will be in the women's health with all the hormones and additional hormones, and we have lots of stuff. There's a lot of SNPs. We were just talking today about SNPs that control everything that do relate to breast cancer risk. It's not a risk calculator, but also even SNPs that relate. There's one that we were looking at today, a SUOX, that relates to whether somebody does better with tamoxifen versus chemotherapy with breast cancer. And it was a huge difference in their lifespan if they happen to be this low SUOX form, because tamoxifen doesn't get converted to the active form without SUOX. They don't do well with tamoxifen. Well, that's really helpful. The likelihood of them being alive 10 years later was 5 times higher if they did something other than tamoxifen. So there's some interesting things in there, but it's not a breast cancer risk calculator. Is Clotho only in the brain optimization panel, or is it also in the medical? Jordan, I believe we added Clotho to cardiac. Is that true or not true?
Correct. It's also in the cardiac panel as well.
So you will get it on the medical. Good question. Okay, Jordan, there's one or two people that said to opt out. Please make note of that. So there's a couple doctors saying they've been having all their patients get Intelligence DNA and find it valuable. And do you, and again, so another question about, even though they're just doing an introductory consult, do you share the whole report? Yeah, it's their DNA. So they'll hopefully feel comfortable then wanting to work more with you. But either way, they're going to have an advantage of having learned from that consult, because that's the whole point of the hotspot. So, okay. And then how much time do we need to spend with the patient before we present them the consult? This particular doctor normally will talk with the patient for 30 to 60 minutes. No, not for this kind. That's why you're going to do a simple form. You can see this was one on the screen, if I might not be sharing anymore. There's going to be a simple form so you know what they address, and you're not going to spend time before with them. You're going to get their intake form and just jump in and spend the hour. So it's a little bit different, but I think you'll find it fun, as Dr. Lyle said.
Yeah.
Any other things that you want to address, Laura, before we go on?
I think that you're hitting most of the big points, and their questions are great. I think this is a great opportunity for newer practitioners to, it's almost like getting paid for an interview with a patient, right? Because they're getting to learn from you and learn your style. And I think this is, I understand why you're price pointing it at maybe trying to get it to more people. But I think it also is an hour of letting them really get to know the value of working with you. So I think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and you guys think about it, a lot of doctors will do something different as a meet and greet that they may not charge their full, especially a doctor who might charge a large amount to work with them for a year. Having a way of them meeting to greet will, I think, lead to more patients. One of the other fun things, for those of you who are not wanting to be on our list because you're too busy, know that Intelligence DNA is great training wheels for new practitioners. Dr. Lyle just has MD after her name in the screen, but Dr. Lyle was, it still is, a PharmD as well as an MD. And she works with the team where she's trained PharmDs. Now she brings them to the conference, she gets them trained. They are licensed healthcare practitioners. Dr. Kamate works with PAs that are excellent, and people work with nurse practitioners as a team. You can work with a variety of people on your team. We have outstanding nurse practitioners that have their own practices that are too busy. Might be time to add a second colleague. And so know that if you're too busy and you want to expand, post it in Groups.io, post to get a new doctor, new clinician, and we will help them get trained. Maybe not quite in time for February, but that way you'll have, these opportunities will continue to come. There is another very large podcast that's almost as big as Dave Asprey's that will be coming up in the spring. So you'll have time for late spring.
It's a great point. because it doesn't have to be, when you've been in established practice, you're going to be swamped and it seems overwhelming. And that's where you need to utilize team members and bring on qualified practitioners that can do some of this for your patients. I co-manage, patients that I never dreamed I would have PharmDs or other people. When you have a relationship as a concierge doctor, I've been doing that since 2006. I have some long relationships. So bringing another practitioner in to make them be an expert on this to help. I'm still on consults, the majority of them, but I'm not always having to do the prep work, which again, it's just a team approach to make it so we can continue to grow and bring this to as many patients as possible.
Absolutely. And so have fun with it. And the webinars that I know of that I will be on in the fall, or in the late spring, early summer, one of them, his listeners are a lot of business people, and that will be a fun one. It's a more global topic webinar that he's just interested. So I think that we'll have fun together, and reach out and save the weekend of July 24th through 26th. Whether you're a beginner or advanced, we'll have a track for you to come study live with us in Austin.
Thanks for all you're doing and for everyone you're reaching out to and to get the word out.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everybody. You can always email us if we didn't get to some questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.